Chapter 13 Darlene. Darlene's case demonstrates an alien-orchestrated divorce, several abductions, an unusual illness and blatant spiritual warfare. Darlene, 35, was married to Roy for about a year. They are now separated. She has 2 children, teenagers from a previous marriage. Darlene did not discuss her alien abductions with Roy, because when she talked about them he went ballistic and started binge drinking. In August of 1994, Darlene and Roy went on a camping trip at an official lookout site in a mountainous area of Southern California. Roy had the thermos open on his lap, preparing to pour a cup of coffee, when they were both blinded by an intense blue-white light. From the vantage point overlooking the valley they could see that the light flash lit up the darkening sky for at least 5 square miles. Darlene looked at her watch immediately after the light flash and found she had lost about 5 minutes of time. The late afternoon sun had set and it was now darkening into twilight. That just doesn't happen in a few seconds. Roy denied any missing time, and became angry and argumentative every time Darlene mentioned it. Darlene felt it might have been a UFO, but Ray insisted it was a rocket launch from Vandenberg AFB. For the next several days, Roy's attitude shifted to irritability and denial every time Darlene brought up the topic. By listening to the locals on the radio, Darlene discovered that another man had seen the same blinding light and experienced 6 hours of missing time. He described his experience to a neighbor and Darlene figured he was situated less than 1 mile from where she and Roy had their coffee. This confirmed to Darlene that what they experienced was some kind of UFO sighting, but she didn't get the feeling she was abducted. Even with this other man's corroborating missing time story, Ray still denied the event and avoided the UFO issue. Looking back on her life, Darlene recalls that her marriage to Roy started going down the drain immediately after that short camping trip. It was as if Roy was switched off by some external energy force. Roy's personality started to shift, as he became increasingly angry, argumentative and cold. She later learned, not until her divorce a year afterwards, that Roy had become involved with drugs and began seeing other women shortly after the flash of light occurrence. In the summer of 1995, Darlene went through a major alien abduction involving a heretofore unheard of alien type. These aliens, she called, tall pinkies. They can be described more definitively as 7-foot-tall beings with elongated, balloon-like heads. Her abduction experience included 3.5 hours of missing time. She recalls going to bed early one evening around 11 p.m. to awaken later finding herself sitting up in bed seeing the 2 pinkish aliens in her room. Under hypnosis she described them as pale and almost fish-like. Their heads were disproportionate to their bodies, with huge black eyes the size of a fist. Darlene went on to describe the aliens' faces. She recalls one of the aliens looking directly into her eyes as it moved with hypnotic effect. One of the tall pinkies kept moving close to her face, back and forth, almost like a snake charmer. This action had a hypnotic effect on Darlene and the next thing she remembered was sitting up on the side of her bed. 3.5 hours were lost on the clock. Darlene felt groggy, as if she had just come out of anesthesia. She got up and walked into the kitchen, feeling very disoriented and nauseated. She felt intense pain in the back of her head. Clumsily, Darlene bounced back and forth against the hallway walls towards the bathroom. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and was shocked to find black and blue bruising around and under her eyes. She looked like she had survived a head-on collision. Behind her left ear she found a black and blue bruise, as if she'd been hit with a police club. For 2 days Darlene was sick, with head pain, nausea, and fatigue. She went to the doctor's office and was checked out by a physician, who kept asking her if her husband had abused her. The doctor took an optical light instrument and brought it up close to Darlene's face. As he turned on the light, Darlene immediately recoiled screaming, "Please don't hurt me." Again, the physician asked her if she had been battered because he had seen similar responses in spousal abuse cases. But again, Darlene said no. He ordered a CAT scan, which later revealed a definite bruising, and lump behind her left ear and a pocket of fluid trapped in her brain at the rear portion of her head. After the bruising behind her left ear faded, Darlene noticed a newly formed lump behind her right ear. She had frequent migraines, so she went back to the doctor, only to discover that the pocket of fluid, still trapped in her brain, was not subsiding. The doctor prescribed non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs and a mild diuretic to force the swelling to go down. This worked, but from that time on, Darlene experienced many health problems, and was hospitalized several times for kidney stones, pneumonia, and migraines. She also studied many of these ailments in a family medical book because she had been completely without any of these dramatic health problems in her life prior to seeing the blinding flash in the mountains and subsequent abductions. The following December, Darlene underwent a midnight abduction while she was home alone. At this time Roy was working nights and her children were away visiting friends. She had gone to bed at her normal time, 10 to 11 p.m., only to awaken to the telephone ringing. Roy sometimes called at night, so Darlene thought it must be him, but she was sadly mistaken. She answered the phone only to hear an unidentified male voice whispering a nonsensical sentence. She immediately went into a trance, robotically put her clothes on and walked out her front door and waited. All of this was recalled without the use of hypnotic regression, but, at the time she had no control over what she was doing. Waiting outside was a white unmarked van with two men in the front seat. They opened the door, walked out, and one asked Darlene, "We need you to step inside." The men were wearing camouflage military fatigues and drove her to an unknown location northeast of where she lived, somewhere in the Mojave High Desert. She recalled sensing the vehicle sliding down an incline, that felt like it was at least 5 floors underground, like a large city center parking garage or an underground military base. She recalled driving down a tunnel, where they stopped. As Darlene and the two military men stepped out of the van, 3 professional-looking individuals, 2 men and 1 woman, met them. The 2 men were wearing white clinic garb, dark trousers, and shiny black shoes, as if it were some kind of military hospital uniform. The woman was also wearing a white lab coat, a dark skirt, shiny black shoes, and her brown hair was done up in a chignon. They were pleasant, and the woman said to Darlene, "Good to see you again." In her dazed state, Darlene couldn't remember when or where they had met before. The 3 medics then escorted Darlene to an examining room that looked like a doctor's office. Darlene recalled seeing a window covered with horizontal shutter blinds. There was also an examining table. Darlene became very sleepy and told the people, "I'm very tired, I want to go back to sleep." The woman encouraged her to go to sleep and said that everything would be all right when she woke up. Almost as soon as she fell asleep, a loud buzzing sound disturbed her. Darlene yelled for someone to stop that noise, because she couldn't take it anymore. The buzzing apparently caused Darlene to fall back to sleep. Thereafter she remembered nothing until leaving the examining room. Upon leaving the compound, Darlene was instructed to have something to eat and drink as soon as she got home. Darlene was then assisted up off the table and escorted back to a waiting area. The 2 military men met up with her again and helped her into the white van. They drove her home and dropped her off, getting out as before. As Darlene left, she said, "Thank you for bringing me home." Obediently, Darlene walked in the door and immediately went to the refrigerator and poured herself a glass of cold milk. She drank half of it, and left the glass on the living room coffee table. Then she changed clothes and went to bed. Darlene was awakened to the alarm ringing at 5:30 a.m. She then walked to the kitchen, noticing the half glass of milk on the coffee table. The glass was still cold with condensation on the edges. Darlene couldn't remember leaving it there several hours before, so she called Roy at work and asked him why he had come home. Roy told Darlene she was crazy, and that he had been busy all night at work. Then it dawned on her. She remembered coming home from her strange meeting with the 3 lab-coated doctors. To this day, Darlene cannot recall the exact details of her visit to the secret underground facility, and she certainly has never come up with satisfactory answers as to why she was abducted, and why she went along so willingly. In March of 1996, 3 months after visiting the military underground base, Darlene started having vivid teaching dreams in a classroom setting with other students like herself. The dreams usually centered on learning mathematical concepts, scientific logic with a great deal of metaphysics thrown in. This wouldn't seem strange on the surface, until we realize that Darlene almost flunked math in high school. Less than a month after her examination by the lab-coated trio, Darlene's marriage began to fall apart. Luckily, she was able to get support concerning her numerous abductions in my support group. Roy insisted Darlene stay away from the group, and the marriage took a turn for the worse. He was recalcitrant and obnoxious. He harassed Darlene on the phone, and refused to come home for dinner, or to sleep. She had no idea where he was when he wasn't at work, and she noticed he was using methamphetamine and drinking heavily. It was as if Roy was acting a starring role in an alien-orchestrated tragedy. Darlene could no longer live with his violent outbursts. When he was home he smelled of stale beer and body odor. He constantly argued while stoned and generally made himself a pain in the neck. Finally, under advice from several friends, myself included, Darlene obtained a restraining order to keep Roy from harming her and the kids. She filed for divorce, and was forced to move so he couldn't stalk her. He had threatened her life. During the summer of 1996, she met a wonderful older man named Will. He worked for the government, yet deliberately kept his job description vague and indefinable. He believed in the UFO phenomenon, and genuinely cared about her and her kids. From the very start, Will and Darlene felt an instant attraction and shared a deep bond and genuine love for one another. Both she and Will knew it, and for the first time in years Darlene felt truly cherished. It was not love at first sight, but the next best thing. As their trust level continued to rise, she gradually disclosed her experiences with missing time, abductions and the flash of light. She also knew that she was, at one time, taken to a craft of some kind. She teased him one night by saying, "Hey, if you stick with me long enough, you'll probably see a UFO." The new couple shared much time together, taking strolls on hot summer nights. One fall evening, as the sun set, Will and Darlene saw a bright circular orb in the eastern desert sky. The light separated and broke into 5 lights that shot from left to right and then vanished. Darlene asked Will, "Did you see that?" Will stood silent, dumbfounded. They both heard buzzing and humming even after the lights were gone. Finally he was able to stutter a few words. What was that?" Darlene felt triumphant. "That was a UFO. I told you if you knew me long enough you'd see one." Less than 2 minutes after they saw the lights and heard the arcane noises, they had their first close encounter of the third kind, alien contact. It was not a dream. Up ahead, towards the tree line, they both saw 2 very tall figures approaching. They were humanoid, but definitely not human. They were tall, like basketball players, at least 7 feet tall, with broad, squared-off shoulders. One of the entities darted across the road towards them while the other figure stood like a sentinel at the edge of the road. Darlene shouted, "Do you see them?" Will answered nervously, "Yes I did, and frankly Darlene, it's scaring the crap out of me." He paused to take a breath. "I've seen enough. Let's go." Darlene blurted out, "Oh my God, they're coming toward us." Terrified, Will said, "I can't hang with this. Let's go back now." At that point they turned, quickly pacing back for at least 1/4 mile, when Darlene's back began to burn. She said, "My back is on fire. It hurts, it's hot, burning." As soon as she turned around, the beings disappeared and the frightened couple hurried home. As soon as she returned to Will's apartment, Darlene looked at her back and discovered a large 2-inch red spot between her shoulder blades. She called Will into the bathroom to look at it, and he took several snapshots. Within 24 hours Darlene experienced bruising all over her body for no apparent reason, and her back still burned. She went to the doctor, who ordered several tests. He checked her back, suggesting that this could be a type of radiation burn, but was at a loss to explain how. She told the doctor that she had a UFO sighting, but he ignored the comment. For the next several weeks Will was withdrawn, and still upset about the UFO encounter. He also said he felt bad, because he acted like a coward. Darlene called him later to tell him of her doctor's visit and to talk about the encounter. But Will acted coldly and told Darlene, "I can't see you anymore." The love bite had, once again, worked to break up a loving couple. Darlene was grieved and felt betrayed. They had such a great loving relationship just before the sighting, and now, it seemed like Will was shut off, or had been warned away. She wondered if it was his government job. He once told her he had suspicions about a certain place in the Mojave Desert. They use 4 million gallons of water a day. He said. Will explained that that degree of water consumption would be impossible for a community of only 200 or so people. He alluded to the fact that there is an underground base there. A year passed without any communication from Will. Even though they both were in love, Darlene commented to me how unlike her it was to be able to get over him so quickly, without recourse. Darlene was able to get over the breakup easily and became a frequent visitor to the support group. In November of 1997, Darlene located Will in a nearby town, quite by chance, through a mutual friend. She waited until Will's birthday rolled around and gave him a call. Although polite, Darlene could tell that Will was under duress. He spoke softly, probably out of respect for the good times they had. He was curt, and said, "Thank you," like somebody was standing right next to him in the kitchen. "I'm not supposed to be talking to you." His subtle admission that somebody else was running the show sent chills down her back. Will gave no explanation, but it seemed that either his life or livelihood had been threatened. Darlene knew then that she was on the no-go list. Now she knew the truth. Will wasn't being a coward. He probably still loved her, but he was being loyal to Uncle Sam, and had obviously been contacted by some government agency monitoring Darlene's encounters. Twice before this had happened to others in my group. Why were these particular abductees in need of watching, but not others? What were the spooks looking for? Other reports came back to me from reliable sources. Apparently the government felt somebody in my group was of great interest to them, and was keeping tabs on her and another female abductee in that area. Why? And how did they know? In the summer of 1997, I contacted Darlene to ask her if she would like to accompany me and my associate, James Bartley, to visit a Las Vegas abductee support group. I had hoped Darlene could tell her abduction stories there to shed light on some military and other types of abductions. James and I had made some beneficial connections with this group and were invited to do a presentation on our recent research findings. These findings involved reptilians and the detracting spiritual warfare tactics conducted by the aliens. People were most interested in what the ultimate strategy might be. What, for example, have they to gain by wrecking marriages and heterosexual relationships, especially ones that are working so well? And conversely, why would aliens bond two unmarried couples together, only to create emotional chaos in their lives? I called Darlene several weeks before our scheduled trip to Las Vegas and she wanted to go, but as the time approached, I had difficulty getting through to her. She had a new male roommate who wouldn't give her our messages. Sadly, we thought he might be another bad love bite set up sent in to continuously distract her from our research efforts. We were both probably wrong and being paranoid, but, in any case Darlene was incommunicado, and that frightened some associated with the group and the Las Vegas preparations. The week before our Las Vegas trip, I discovered that Darlene had suddenly come down with a severe sore throat and a respiratory infection. Weeks later we discovered that Darlene had a life-threatening form of pneumonia. By the time she got to the doctor her lips started to turn blue, and within 20 minutes of entering the doctor's office, she was rushed into emergency and put on a respirator. I did not find out, until after we returned from Las Vegas, that Darlene had another near-death waking vision in her hospital room on 2 separate nights, a spiritual warfare attack involving witches and alien beings. One could easily ascribe these visions to a high fever, but Darlene did not have a high fever. A simple phone call told us that Darlene had been admitted to the hospital on the Friday we left for Vegas. That evening, while in her hospital room, she became aware of the spirit bodies of 2 black witches reciting incantations. They were holding black candles, and wearing black hooded robes with red sashes. Darlene had seen these witches before in a spiritual warfare attack the preceding summer. She got the distinct feeling they were putting a hex on her. They reminded her of the witches in the opening scene of Macbeth. Darlene cried out to Jesus, "Jesus help me! Jesus help me!" over and over again. As she called out, she saw 2 angels at either end of her hospital bed, as if they were protecting her. A nurse named Shelley entered the room, asking what was wrong. Darlene replied, "I feel an evil force in this room." The nurse said, "Okay, then let's pray." So the 2 prayed, and the evil feeling seemed to dissipate, and Darlene went back to sleep. Darlene was awakened again when the nursing shift changed. Another nurse entered her room and saw that Darlene was awake. This nurse was tall and slender and asked Darlene condescendingly, "Oh, so I hear you're a born-again Christian." According to Darlene, this nurse spoke to her in a derogatory tone. Darlene answered, "Yes." The nurse continued, "Well, what church do you go to?" Darlene told her the name of her local church. Then the nurse mocked her, "Do you think your church is going to help you?" Darlene defended herself by stating that she has thousands of people praying for her now. Her mother put out a request to a national prayer line and the local church. The tall nurse folded her arms and huffed, "Well, it's not going to help." At that moment, Darlene said the nurse's eyes changed, appearing cold and dead like a corpse. Darlene intuitively knew that this nurse was a Satanist. The nurse pressed on, "Do you claim that Jesus is your Savior?" "Yes, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior." Darlene replied. "Well, I don't serve that God." Darlene defended her faith, "Well, there are only 2 forces, good and evil." The nurse's eyes deadened and went cold again. Darlene did not want that nurse coming close to her, let alone touching her. Luckily, the respiratory therapist entered the room at that point and assisted Darlene with her treatments. The next day, Darlene's heart began to show signs of congestive heart failure. The doctor told her the pneumonia bout she went through had left her heart muscle weak and expanded. Meanwhile, Darlene's blood tests and laboratory cultures came back from the lab. This time they were not missing, but the doctors had a great deal of trouble diagnosing the results because they seemed to fit no known pattern. One symptom indicated a viral infection, and yet interferon B and several other treatment modalities had no effect. Further tests for viral infections, including a battery of Epstein-Barr tests and an HIV panel, showed nothing out of the ordinary. As far as current hematology was concerned, Darlene's blood was normal. The doctors were unable to identify the virus or bacteria responsible for her sudden and dramatic illness. They tried 3 different strong antibiotics and nothing could shake the infection responsible for Darlene's pneumonia. The prognosis looked bad, and the doctor said that if this continues, Darlene only had a 10% chance of surviving. The daytime dragged into evening as Darlene struggled to breathe, losing her energy. She drifted in and out of sleep. Later that night, Darlene sensed an evil presence back in the room. This time Darlene saw, clairvoyantly, their spirit bodies, 3 witches reciting incantations again. Darlene also noticed 2 small gray aliens and a 4.5-foot tall reptilian coming through the wall. Darlene could feel her life energy being drained out of her body, and she intuited that her life was in severe danger. She again cried, "Lord Jesus, help me." Unexpectedly, an angel with a bright white sword, probably an image of Saint Michael, appeared in the room and commanded the witches, "She is the Lord's. You can't have her." With one quick swoop of the sword the angel cut off the witches' heads, all three of them. The aliens scurried and disappeared through the wall like cockroaches running from the light. With all her might, Darlene got up out of bed, ripped the IVs from her arms and struggled to get out of the room. Her blood squirted everywhere and she grabbed the sheets to cover her bleeding arms. As she got close to the door, she felt an invisible force field keeping her away from the door. While crouched on the floor in exhaustion, the door opened. The witch nurse entered the room, saw blood everywhere and stared at Darlene with those same cold eyes. With every ounce of effort Darlene screamed, "Don't touch me. I know what you are. Stay away from me, and take your goons and demons with you." The witch nurse walked closer towards Darlene and as she got near, the nurse was violently thrown back against the door. Saint Michael appeared again and the windows glowed with a heavenly light. The nurse's eyes popped open in abject terror. At that moment, the head nurse entered the room. Darlene warned her, "Get that woman away from me, she's a witch." The dark nurse quickly left the room. Darlene requested to be transferred to another room. Judging from the state of Darlene's arms and the blood all around the room, the hospital staff decided to place her under 24-hour observation in ICU. From that time onward Darlene was determined to get out of that hospital as soon as possible. She knew she was not crazy. She called her mother and begged her to take her home. She thought for certain that she would not live another day if she remained in that hospital. The next day Darlene's mother arrived and had her transferred out to another hospital. The doctor later admitted that during the first week they had almost lost Darlene 3 times, and didn't expect her to live. During her last couple of weeks in the second hospital, I called Darlene to ask how she was doing. She told me of her terrifying ordeal, the satanic nurse and the aliens in her room. She also mentioned Saint Michael and his saving grace. It seemed as if a forceful entity simply did not want her to attend that Las Vegas UFO meeting. I suggested we pray over the phone and said, "Next time this happens, try this." At that moment the phone died. I hung up, redialed the telephone number and it kept ringing. No answer. I called the hospital to ask what happened and I finally got reconnected again on the phone. Luckily, we were able to finish our conversation and prayer. I visited Darlene during her last week in the hospital and was glad to see her improve. She had suffered damage to her aorta from the congestive heart failure, and the doctor said that in 5 years' time she may have to undergo major replacement surgery. Although Darlene had recovered, she still experiences frequent bouts of pneumonia and continues to have abduction-related activity. She is more cautious about love bites, yet maintains a good attitude and strong spiritual foundation. Chapter 14 John and Nadine. This case demonstrates an alien-involved bonding, which relied heavily on telepathic communication. John is a 41-year-old married man who has undergone at least 5 abductions by the small Greys. His abductions began in childhood, and may have included his older brother, since both can remember episodes of missing time. Many of John's encounters involved musical tones and alien symbols and, because of these experiences, he believes he developed a talent for music. During his teens he became obsessed with learning as many instruments as possible. Later, in adult life, John found some of the symbols he had seen in his childhood in a book entitled Abduction by Debbie Jordan. This flashback triggered his recall of several abduction scenarios. John's life changed dramatically in 1983, after he experienced a series of vivid precognitive dreams. Each of the dreams showed him walking and talking with the same beautiful woman. He knew nothing about her, Nadine, except that she lived in a house on rural property. In 1984 John began to dream of another woman, Janet, whom he later met and married in 1990. Nadine turned out to be the future wife of his work associate, but it wasn't until 1989 that all three would meet and discover their unique connections. In 1987 John worked for an air ambulance company in Hayward, California, a sprawling bedroom community in the San Francisco Bay Area and due east of Silicon Valley. Janet worked for the same charter company, but, in 1987, they only knew each other as fellow employees. In 1989, John read Whitley Strieber's first bestseller, Communion, an historical book about Strieber's own abduction experiences. His associate, Tom, saw the book one day and commented that this was the same book his wife was reading. About 1 week later, at lunch, Tom and John started up a conversation on the topic of UFOs and abductions. John was still secretive about his early experiences, but Tom was forthcoming about his wife, Nadine. Tom said, "Nadine claims she was abducted and had similar experiences to those described in that book you left on your desk last week, but frankly I think she's just making it up." John said, "Oh well, lots of people have had these abduction experiences, they just don't talk about it." "Yes," Tom said, "but I think she's making it up." Tom paused as he finished his sandwich. "I'll have her call you, see what you think." About 3 days later, Nadine called John at Tom's request and they discussed personal experiences. John told Nadine about his dreams of a woman in 1983, and the details of the house and surrounding property of the dream. John's perfect description of Nadine and of Tom's summer home in the mountains near Chico, in Northern California, shocked her. Tom had never described his home to John. Within weeks, on December 19, 1989, John and Janet drove up to Chico to visit Nadine at the Chico house. On that particular day Tom was out of town. Nadine had planned for John and Janet to spend the day and other guests were to arrive in the evening. As John parked his car, Nadine's golden retriever, Goldie, ran forward and jumped on John's lap before he could even get out of the car. The dog behaved as if he knew John, greeting him with slobbery kisses. Now a lot of dogs do this if they like someone's smells or the sound of their car, but Goldie was an old crotchety dog who had abandoned acting like a puppy many years earlier. Nadine can't remember when she last saw her loyal companion act so affectionately toward a stranger. Throughout the day, John and Nadine shared stories of alien encounters, compared coincidences, and agreed that their meeting together seemed pre-planned. At 5:00 p.m. John heard electronic music playing while he was in the bathroom. It seemed to come from the ceiling area. In the kitchen, Nadine also heard something akin to music, but Janet did not. In reality there was no radio or stereo on anywhere in the house. They figured it might be some neighbor's kids playing their radio at an unusually high volume, but this also turned out to be untrue. The neighbors were not home. A half hour later John saw 3 small lights flash from outside the living room window. These lights were spaced in a triangle pattern about 6 inches apart, one red, one blue-green and another white. John pointed out the lights to Janet, but they blinked out before he could even finish his sentence. Immediately Nadine said, "I know, they're here." At that point Nadine suggested they take a walk outside, but John didn't want to go out in the woods at night. Things were getting a bit spooky. The three talked about it for a while and at 6:15 Nadine again suggested they go for a walk. At that moment Janet stood up and said she was tired and abruptly decided to take a nap, which was out of character for her. At 6:30, John and Nadine took a stroll through the pines and a manzanita thicket, while Janet napped in an upstairs bedroom. John felt uneasy the whole time, feeling like they were being watched. Somehow, it took an hour just to walk 50 yards, which didn't make sense. By 7:30 John and Nadine began a timorous walk back to the house. As they approached the house they could finally see the path and felt relieved, but not for long. Before they could reach the house they were stopped dead in their tracks by the sight of a dozen small multicolored lights suspended in the air above the house, twinkling as if they were small Christmas lights. At the sight of the lights, Nadine started crying and John's knees began shaking. Scared and concerned for Janet's safety, John and Nadine both said, "We must hurry inside. Janet is alone." As they started walking towards the house the multicolored lights started to blink off one by one. For some strange reason, John and Nadine stopped short of the house, and instead of going into the house, leaned against John's car. It was as if they were being mesmerized by the blinking lights. At that point, John recalls, Nadine made two bizarre comments. Janet didn't pass because she can't have babies. Tom didn't pass either because he had a vasectomy. That's why Tom can't see them when they come. They are going to ruin it for you and Janet. You aren't supposed to be with her. They are trying to break Tom and I up. Later, when John asked Nadine about her comments, she completely forgot saying them. This short-term memory loss is indicative of post-abduction behavior. By the time John and Nadine got back into the house, it was nearly 8 p.m. Janet was still asleep and seems to have been unaware of the lights. John went upstairs to check on Janet. She was very groggy and asked, "What happened outside?" Before John had a chance to answer, the phone rang and Nadine's other guests announced they were on their way over, and were waiting at the general store 5 miles away. The property was so remote, someone had to be dispatched to guide them through the woods to Nadine's house. Janet decided she needed to freshen up, so John and Nadine drove the 5 miles to meet the guests to lead them into the 25-acre property. The only entrance was a small gated road, which can hardly be seen at night. About 2 miles down the main road, Nadine saw a streak of light bolt past the car. John slowed to a crawl and then noticed a red, baseball-sized, light following the car. Visibly upset, Nadine began crying. After a short while the red light disappeared into the woods. As soon as they met the guests, Nadine calmed down and changed the conversation to other things. Nadine figured that their guests were not interested in UFO stories. Besides, she wanted to forget about it anyway. At 10:30 p.m. all of the guests had arrived, several with cars who knew how to navigate the road back to the main highway. They socialized outside on the front deck of the house and were distracted to the sounds of low-flying helicopters, but none could be seen. At this time, John recalled hearing Nadine's voice in his head saying, "I wish they, the other guests, would leave." For a brief moment John and Nadine were aware of each other's thoughts, as if they were having a telepathic conversation. The party was supposed to go on for a few more hours, but in a few moments the guests left one by one, as if they were being mentally directed to leave by some unseen force. After the guests left, John, Janet and Nadine went to bed in separate bedrooms. Before retiring, John noticed that his pager battery was on low. This was odd, because he just put in a new battery the day before. During the night, John felt an ghostly hand gently brush his hair and forehead. He bolted out of bed immediately and didn't sleep the rest of the night. On returning home the following day, John called Nadine as soon as possible, only to discover she was deeply depressed. Clearly she was frightened and hated to stay at the Chico house alone, Goldie, the dog being no match for aliens, if they decided to come back. But she was also concerned about John and told him she felt they had been abducted because she was experiencing the post-abduction exhaustion and uneasiness. Later that night, John awoke several times and discovered he had lost 3 hours of time, and his pager battery was dead again, after having placed new batteries in it. Note: John and other abductees have noticed that after alien activity batteries on various appliances become drained and fresh light bulbs burn out. From that time onward John and Nadine called one another on the phone daily. They became quite close and shared a strong psychic bond, intuiting one another's thoughts and feelings. Nadine developed a sudden burning interest in Native American spirituality, and John was compelled to study everything he could on especially and psychic phenomena. Every so often they visited and shared their research and copious notes on their findings. Through their research and visits, Nadine and John started remembering more of what transpired during their missing time experience. Both recalled being told by the aliens that they must learn how to communicate telepathically, and that they would have to do this because they would soon become separated. John visited Nadine at her home several times, but Tom started to get jealous. It made working together for John and Tom tense and on edge. John and Nadine decided to stop calling and writing each other and to let things die down, but their bond was so strong they could easily communicate through darshan, a Sanskrit word for what we call distant viewing and telepathy. John and Nadine toyed with the possibility of romantic ideations but refrained from a physical relationship. John's friendship with Tom remained strained at work. At that time and afterwards, Nadine and Tom's marriage grew unstable. John and Janet had begun dating and were married the following year, and Nadine and Tom moved away to Seattle. This confirms what the aliens predicted. Nadine eventually divorced Tom and remarried, and afterwards lost contact with John. In late 1995, at the request of a close friend, John underwent a hypnotic regression to uncover some of his abduction episodes and missing time. He discovered that he had an encounter involving Nadine, before December of 1989, on her property in Chico. Small gray aliens in tan uniforms orchestrated John and Nadine's joint abduction. These same aliens were the ones involved in John's childhood abductions. He intuitively knew and remembered under hypnosis that he and Nadine had been together several times. I believe the aliens put them together so that they would meet later in life. Under hypnosis, John remembered they had been together and found out that they had lived only 1 block away from one another as young children in the Bay Area. Before they separated, Nadine told John that the aliens were trying to set them up as biological mates for reproductive purposes. She knew the aliens would try to break up her marriage with Tom, which they eventually did, albeit in Seattle. John and Janet's relationship remained solid. John also found out later that Janet couldn't have children, confirming Nadine's previous comments about what the aliens told her. At the time, John and Janet were friends, and even after they began dating, John had no idea that Janet could not have children. In our final interview, John said, "In some respects I'm incredibly angry at being subjected to these experiences. Yet, because of them I have come in contact with some very good and honest people whom I otherwise would never have had the chance to meet. Also, if it were not for my experiences, I never would have come in contact with the members of an abductee support group. In the 5 years I have watched it grow, it has become a fairly close-knit family, and I love them all as if they were my own family. My experiences did make me take a hard look at myself, and I did not always like what I saw. I believe I am a stronger person for it. At times it still scares me, and I have to go around the house to make sure all the doors and windows are locked tight. But I have a supportive wife who helps me through the bad times. For that I am truly blessed." This is a case where the aliens tried to break up 2 couples, but John and Janet's strength was strong enough to resist the aliens. This proves to me that the alien manipulated setups can be overcome. Chapter 15, Suzanne. The following case demonstrates how the aliens work through sleeper operatives and trained infiltrators to observe UFO groups. The sleepers feel they are doing mankind a service, while in reality they are being used to spread misery, chaos and misinformation. Suzanne is a lifelong abductee having contact with various greys and reptilians. She is a devotee to alien encounter research and runs a support group for UFO experiencers. Suzanne spends a tremendous amount of energy organizing the group, and hosts occasional lectures with special guest speakers in the UFO community. She is spiritually oriented and wants to take a positive approach to the alien presence and their activities, yet she is traumatized by her own alien encounters. She has had a number of reptilian sexual assaults, and psychic rapes, and feels that her reptilian handler is possessive of her. At times the sexual encounters with the 7-foot-tall reptilian male are shrouded by pleasant screen memories, and sometimes she thinks these attacks may be coming from her own past life experiences as vivid dreams. In several therapy sessions she had discovered that cover memories were implanted in her mind to hide the reptilian rape. As Suzanne networked and learned more about other abductees, she became more skeptical of the overly spiritualized positive view of the aliens. Suzanne underwent hypnotic regressions, rebirthing and various modes of counseling to bring to light her fragmented abduction memories, some of which were very traumatic. Eventually she started to share her discoveries with members of the support group. Marie, a new, very friendly contactee, considered herself psychically gifted, joined the group and began to bond with Suzanne. She often performs psychic readings for New Age groups, in person and over the telephone. Marie and Suzanne hit it off, and coincidentally, Marie was looking for a new place to live. Suzanne just happened to need a roommate, so Marie moved in. At first Marie appears positive and supportive. She offers free psychic readings to some support group members over the phone. As time goes on, a rift begins to appear. Marie, in typical New Age fashion, believes the space beings are helpful spirit guides, possibly even gods or angels, who are here for our spiritual development and evolution. Suzanne, having seen far too much misery caused by alien abductions, is convinced they are for the most part, malevolent and dedicated to the dominance of the human spirit. Marie channels a being called Sananda or Ashtar and started charging people for readings and workshops. Suzanne saw this as a conciliatory gesture, but all the while the channeling was going on, Marie was raiding Suzanne's client list for psychic readings over the phone. Suzanne became furious with Marie when she discovered the breach of ethics. But more importantly, Marie managed to convince about half of the list that Suzanne's attitude toward the aliens was wrong, and that the aliens bring a message of peace and goodwill. Suzanne realized that Marie has a Dr. Jekyll and Mrs. Hyde personality and realizes Marie may be dissociative. In other words, she may be going through what psychologists call fugue state amnesia, which usually leads to a diagnosis of a multiple personality disorder. It is important to realize that this is not a psychotic state. The person with multiple personality disorder is not crazy, they are not schizophrenic. Neither of the personalities is really split from reality, but in most cases the personalities do not know about each other. In other words, the personalities disassociate from one another. Although once very rare, this disorder is now well documented and is categorized in medical terms as dissociative personality disorder, or DID, usually caused by early severe trauma, or in this case, could be trauma-based mind control techniques used by Project Monarch and MK-Ultra. In the long run, Suzanne saw that Marie's metaphysical platitudes masked a frightened, anxious and angry woman who could not deal with her own alien encounters. Marie really didn't know what happened in most of her alien contacts, but believed it must be good for her. Why, if the abductions were so good for her, does she maintain a persistent undertone of negative energy? Why would she steal my confidential list? Suzanne wondered. Other people in the support group made similar comments and noticed that Marie was draining their energy insidiously, like a psychic vampire. Stretched to the limit, Suzanne asked Marie to move out. One weekend when Suzanne was away speaking to abductees, Marie finally moved out, but not after creating chaos and infighting in Suzanne's local support group. While Suzanne was away, she met another reptilian contactee, Tina, who claims to be psychic. Tina, like Marie, feels the reptilians are really good and have done numerous positive things for her. Tina spoke positively about her male reptilian handler, who she claimed never assaulted her, despite waking up with claw marks, and gave her special assignments. She tells Suzanne that, you can have anything you want as long as you do the assignments they give you. Tina has not ever had any extensive therapy or hypnotic regressions to uncover her alien encounters. Suzanne is appalled at this growing naivete in the abductee community and set a resolve to delve further into the alien agenda. When Suzanne returned home, she discovered that Marie has moved elsewhere, leaving a mess behind for Suzanne to clean up. Marie also converted the utility bills to her own name, and shut down all of the utilities when she moved out, leaving Suzanne without electricity or water. Shortly thereafter, Suzanne discovered that the UFO support group has effectively split apart and that Marie had been unconsciously working as a sleeper operative, for months, to undermine Suzanne's efforts. Suzanne contacted James and I, and we presented our research findings to a gathering of her remaining group. During our visit there, Suzanne's new roommate, Jody, an informed and intelligent abductee, claimed to have been contacted by an NSA, National Security Agency, operative who tried to get her to take part in a mind control project. Jody avoided the agent, but he was persistent, eventually offering a lucrative easy job. In spite of this temptation, Jody ignored him and he finally gave up. We were not sure whether to believe Jody or not, but considering Jody's background in the Air Force, at one time working on a secret project, we gave her the benefit of the doubt. Was she being recruited so that Jody and Suzanne would be more easily monitored? The next morning Jody and Suzanne looked outside towards the parking lot only to see an unidentified man in white coveralls searching Jody's car. The man became aware that he had been spotted and peeled out in a white van. To avoid future problems and violations of their privacy, Suzanne and Jody moved to another town and took steps to disguise their identity. Suzanne is deeply disappointed at the loss of her support group and is rebuilding her network of contacts. Chapter 16: Spiritual Warfare. From a religious viewpoint, all of the cases presented represent forms of spiritual warfare. This term was introduced by Christian communities to designate the degree of commitment one must assert to fight evil, any evil. In this case, I find it appropriate to apply the term to the fight against alien abductions, and their profound after effects. The lyric line, "Onward Christian soldiers, marching as to war," comes to mind. But New Age believers, Buddhists, and anyone with a spiritual side, can understand spiritual warfare. It is the fight to save one's own soul, the fight against evil. To do this one must become adept in spiritual warfare techniques, Christian or otherwise. Those who think the alien agenda is one of benevolence may disagree, but I am convinced the aliens are also conducting a kind of spiritual warfare against us. I am convinced that the aliens have set goals that are diametrically opposed to normal human values. Later we will look at spiritual warfare from the alien viewpoint, but, first, we must go over what humans can do to fight back. It should be understood that no religion on earth advocates rape and abduction. In Judeo-Christian religions the commandment, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife," stands out. But the aliens are also in violation of the commandment against stealing, for certainly abduction is an act of theft both of body and mind as well as soul. Most importantly, "Thou shalt not kill," stands out as a violation because the alien agenda has forced some people to suicide and has possibly caused the entrapment of the soul, in many cases a kind of death, which allows the body to live on as a hollow shell, while the abductee becomes nothing but a host for a walk-in alien entity. I draw this observation from my own observational experience. In several sessions I have come across abductees who claim the aliens walked inside of them to co-inhabit their bodies. I call this a hosting process, akin to a spiritual or demonic possession, wherein the alien heavily influences the thoughts and behaviors of the host, while helping to perpetuate the alien agenda on Earth. The children of abductees, and abducted children themselves, may talk about their abduction experiences, only to be told that they are just nightmares. Children often describe the alien intruders as monsters who came out of the closet or through the walls. The children are immediately invalidated when their parents or siblings tell them there is no such thing as a monster or an alien. The parental denial process sets up a vast wall of cognitive dissonance, which immediately lowers the child's sense of self-worth. Naturally, their self-esteem goes down because kids, even though they are full of imagination, generally know the difference between dream monsters and real monsters by a certain age. Some child abductees report that the aliens, like rapists and child molesters, instructed them not to talk about their encounters, a pattern followed by all pedophiles. This secrecy pact is part of the thrill for pedophiles and may add to vicarious sexual stimulation for the aliens, too. It seems they are promoting and conditioning secret-keeping behavior. It is not okay to tell the truth, you will be admonished if you tell the truth. I think the bad aliens look for dysfunctional families and promote this kind of destructive behavior in normal families. Why? Because these kinds of families ensure secret-keeping behavior and a steady supply of emotional misery, negative emotional energy, food for the aliens to feed upon. If not food, this system at least keeps the victims in a state of continual manipulation, distractions and disempowerment. It is apparent that the aliens will go to great lengths to maintain secrecy. Their main security technique is to instill false memories. The other technique is to provide distractions, so many that the abductee is overwhelmed. In this state, the abductee is unable to take a serious look inward. Outright deception and threats, as was demonstrated in Ted Rice's case when his grandmother was deceived, and assaulted and then threatened for her strong protective instinct, are also commonly reported. I call these reprisals. Our democratic social structure reinforces the perception that aliens, especially fascist aliens, do not exist. Because no one believes the abductee's story, he or she often turns inward for a period of darkness, then may suddenly act out in rebellion against parents, school, religion or society as a whole. However, if one tells about their alien contact experiences with a positive spin, they are often rewarded. The problem with positive alien encounters is that they are often used as cover stories for the aliens to hide behind. This occurs often when they masquerade as angels of light. This pattern is seen more often today than ever before, and has been uncovered by many researchers such as Carla Turner. I do, however, maintain a hopefulness that good ETs can and do exist. But this is probably a minority of the ET contacts. Frustrated abductees often question their own sanity, not wanting to believe that they may be victims of anything so potentially frightening. Both adult and children abductees, who have been denied validation, have a tendency to distrust their own feelings, remain in denial, and even act out in anger, especially as assorted other anxiety traits begin to appear. Those who have turned anger inward will become depressed or even suicidal depending on the extent of trauma endured. Chapter 17: Stress and Dysfunction. Post-traumatic stress disorder, a symptom cluster, known as shell shock in World War II, is common among those who have had alien encounters. If you have ever been in a close-call auto accident, you will understand a little about this syndrome. You may feel fine immediately after the accident because the adrenaline is subsiding, but once you get a chance to park the car, you start to shake and maybe even cry. You say, "Wow, that was a close call." You break out in a sweat and promise to drive more carefully in the future. Now, magnify this experience several times and imagine going through it chronically, and you will get some glimmering of the pain abductees must go through. They have few, if any, to talk to about their problem, so they remain emotionally isolated. If an abduction was extremely traumatic, the characteristic symptoms may be a series of panic attacks and a sense of helplessness. These initial reactions are commonly followed by partial or complete amnesia. This amnesia may include re-experiencing and distorting images of the abduction, recurrent unrelated nightmares, flashbacks, and avoidance of stimuli associated with the event. This is referred to in clinical work as emotional numbing. The abductee may develop increased or decreased arousal to sexual stimuli, oversensitivity to normal stimuli, noises in the night, fear of the dark and sleep disorders such as insomnia and night terrors. These are very similar to reactions reported by rape and molestation victims. Young children may express their trauma through obsessive, compulsive play. They may exhibit a marked change in orientation toward the future, for example, a foreshortened view of childhood. Fatalism, thanatophobia, a morbid fear of death, and other philosophical issues that require an adult understanding, seem pressed upon the child. Children should not be worried about career or marriage, but many traumatized children worry about these things every day. Fixation on these worries leads to cynicism and negative attitudes in the teenage years. The psychic numbing or diminished responsiveness to stimuli usually begins soon after the traumatic event. This emotional anesthesia causes the abductee to feel detached and estranged from other people, which, in adulthood, can inevitably lead to the loss of a job or even an entire career. Other symptoms for traumatized abductee teenagers are rebellious acting out, promiscuity, drug and substance abuse, and bizarre dress. These symptoms are not unique to abductees, but a juvenile delinquency pattern can be traced to many childhood events, whereas the abductee-based pattern often comes on suddenly, even in cases where neither parent was abusive. Extreme phobias of going to the doctor or dentist, or even preoccupation with horror scenes such as blood and guts films or suddenly embracing the goth, or gang, lifestyle have also been reported. At very young ages the trauma victim is likely to develop dissociative amnesia, loss of time, blackouts, with concomitant poor coping skills. Often, abuse has already occurred in the abductee's family, compounding the issues of abuse by the aliens. As the child grows older, severe forms of personality damage may manifest in the form of overcompensatory behavior, obsessive door and window locking, perfectionism, poor self-image, narcissistic preoccupations, and psychopathic or dissociative disorders. Most abductees do not exhibit the severe personality damage, although those who were more traumatized will tend to have more of these symptoms in varying degrees. For those in mind control projects like MKUltra and Monarch, this is more noticeable. Trauma-based mind control programs, in adults, bipolar wavering between egoism and depression is common. In the case of Charles and Sarah, Charles was told he was chosen to be one of the Savior's helpers. This messianic appeal often works, especially in cases aligned with fundamentalist Christians and many New Age groups, because the believer desperately wants to believe in the second coming of a Messiah figure. The aliens simply interpolate their own agenda and pose themselves as representatives of the hero to come. This illusion allows the abductees to feel good about themselves, for a short time, but inevitably the spark of life fades. Sometimes the target is re-abducted and reprogrammed. Especially when the cover memories of the abduction is seriously questioned or threatened in any way. Daryl Sims, a well-known abduction investigator, has also noted that some abductees do an about-face in their attitudes towards the aliens once the alien agenda is seriously challenged. After a series of abrupt and unplanned personality changes, the abductee in denial grows even more defensive, and, left unchecked, the defensiveness can grow into a downward spiral of dysfunctional behavior, even violence. The person then usually denies being abducted, then gradually switches to defending the aliens. If these symptomatic defenses remain unresolved, a Stockholm syndrome may result. In that case the contactee sings the praises of his or her captors, e.g., extraterrestrials. Any negative alien abduction information is now seen as fear-based and anathema to one's spiritual evolution. What is happening here? The alien-defending behaviors of the now zealous contacts are reminiscent of the cult members of the Rishni Esh, or Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA, the political group who abducted Patty Hearst in the 1970s. Is there hope for these abductees once they are already in the clutches of their alien handlers? Are not our human rights inalienable, as Thomas Jefferson said? Perhaps back then, Thomas Jefferson knew something about how easy it is to have our freedoms stripped away, until we are nothing more than puppets of a foreign power. Back then it was England, now it's the aliens, or whoever is acting behind their image. Have we, as a race, been manipulated and deceived into agreeing with the aliens, only to end up their mind-controlled slaves carrying their agenda of world domination? Is the picture as bleak as it sounds? In a few of the Love Bite cases, Darlene, Sophia and Angelina have challenged the aliens through spiritual warfare. I believe that this is a productive start to cut at the very root of the alien abduction phenomenon. If we do not first become disturbed enough to take a hard look at the dynamics of the dark side of abductions, then we are destined to become slaves in an alien new world order. Unless we wake up. Yes, there is hope. I've found a number of spiritual warrior abductees who have inspired me to bring a message of hope that our true freedom can be won. But this victory will only come through a process of love, determination, faith, and increased awareness. In essence, one's love for the truth must surpass one's programming, fear of reprisals and peer pressure. Angelina, and some of her abductee friends, believe the aliens are working hand in hand with secret government agencies. In their opinion, this cabal is using the fear of future disasters to train and control abductees. These foreseeable events include massive earthquakes and floods, the effects of biological warfare, nuclear accidents, pollution, and political coups. A growing number of ufologists wonder about this dilemma. Is this just a cover story, programmed into abductees to keep them compliant, or are the aliens actually planning to create havoc on Earth? Are the aliens training their chosen bloodlines for future survival in a world cataclysm they know will occur, because they caused it? We may never know what the aliens are planning. It is likely that the alien agenda spans hundreds if not thousands of years. If the aliens are planning actual disasters, perhaps they think they are already in control. Angelina reports that during her alien orchestrated testing and training sessions, she was taught basic survival skills and emergency medical care, even triage. Angelina's training scenarios took place at night in lucid dreams. As mentioned before, some of these dreams may really be tests designed to evaluate the subject's ability to recall what the abductors want them to recall. Abductions often occur many times, over many years, as we have seen in several of the cases presented. I need to make it clear that abductions by aliens often occur without any UFO sighting at all. More often than not, the aliens intrude directly into the living space of the abductee or through an interdimensional portal or doorway. See Figure 1. Whatever the method, it is still an invasion of privacy and a violation of human rights. Some victims are shattered easily by the constant onslaught of alien visitation, others have a natural sense of spiritual warfare and good ego integration, allowing them to defend themselves. Their ability to mitigate their post-traumatic stress helps them cope very well, considering their experiences. But the easily shattered victims have a rough time in recovery.